All right, Derek Piper, Illini Inquirer. It is time for our weekly chat, Derek. And I've been focused on football, but man, I go on the message boards and I see some heated conversation about Illinois' point guard situation. Isaac Trotter, our guy 24/7 Sports, weighed in on it. Thought it was really well done. We talked about it on the podcast last week with Isaac Trotter. So we will dive into the point guard conversation. We'll dive into workouts starting for Illinois, who's there, who's not quite yet. And then we'll dive into this old school thing called prep recruiting that we will talk about, because this used to be the big thing nowadays, but it's not so much anymore. But Derek, how you been the last couple weeks, man?
I'm doing pretty good. We're not talking Ray J. Dennis, so that's been a refreshing thing in my life. We've kind of let that go in the past. Well, I mean, the message board's still bringing it up a little bit, but we have pretty good clarity for the most part on the roster, so that's been nice. And yeah, prep recruiting, that used to be a thing. We used to know like 5 to maybe even 10 sometimes top targets, and things would boil down and we'd have big visits. Not to say we won't see some guys on campus as you go through June. I think that's going to happen any summer that we go through, but it's been slower developing on 24, and we'll get into all of that. So actually going to see some high school guys this weekend, going up to Chicago for the Riverside Brookfield Shootout. It's always one of my favorite events, really well run up there in Chicago. And you get all the top Chicago teams, Simeon, Whitney Young, on down the line.
You know, you can bring Kate up, walk across the street, go to the zoo for a little bit, make a weekend out of it, Piper.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, it is Father's Day weekend too, so I mean that's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, my wife was asking me what I want to do for Father's Day weekend. I had no idea, but yeah, maybe going to see some high school basketball games. That's what I should do. Just get away by myself for a little bit.
There you go. Some good players there.
Yeah, definitely some good players. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Derek, let's bring this question up first. We see our scholarship chart is full of 13 scholarships. Is Illinois done?
To be determined. And there's a lot of layers to that and things working within it. You add Jeremiah Williams, who's the last spot. That's the last scholarship spot. You have 13, like you mentioned. He has not been formally announced by Illinois. I think that is interesting because we've had when Justin Harmon, when Marcus Domask, and Quincy Guerrier end up committing, it's within a week. Usually you get the signed financial tender and they're announced. So I think that with Jeremiah, you have a number of questions. We talked about the waiver situation. He's going to have to get one to be immediately eligible. You got the Achilles issue, him coming off of that. I know that he's been able to do some things on the court, at least non-contact, light workout type of stuff. So you look at the 10-month window in terms of recovery. He had the injury back in October, maybe August. Even if you're being a little bit more cautious, sometime in the fall, maybe if things are on track, he'd be cleared. But the fact that he has not been announced, it just seems to be more and more of a clouded picture around him. And I've been hearing stuff in terms of, we're not relying on him to be our fix-it point guard. Some people have even told me they don't expect him to play this year for Illinois. So that's yet to play out. I know that Justin Harmon's not on campus either. Quincy Guerrier is not on campus yet. Both guys still have academic work to complete before they can graduate and then be able to show up. Quincy, no real issues there in terms of my knowledge that he's fully expected to show up. Justin seems to have a little bit more of a hurdle to get here. Not saying it's out of the question, but that's maybe a little bit more up in the air as we're here in mid-June. So if that wasn't to work out or something with Jeremiah were to fall through, then you have a spot open. Otherwise, you're full on scholarships. And we can talk Antonio Reeves too, because that's another part of this equation that has been a wild one on the national buzz in terms of what that thing looks like. A guy that's on Kentucky's roster, taking classes at Illinois State, might transfer, might not. That's been a wild one.
Yeah, so let's bring up this point guard situation. If you want to be a Big Ten contender, Derek, this is a murky situation. This is, as Trotter said, iffy. It's one of the iffiest point guard situation among the high major programs. Not to say they don't have options. There's plenty of options but they're just unproven options at this point. But I do think we have to discuss the nuance of this, which I know some people don't like diving into nuance on the internet. But this was still a pretty dang good offseason for Illinois basketball, mostly because you got Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins back, who will be two of the best players in the Big Ten. Marcus Domask and Quincy Guerriere are really, really good additions. And you got Dane Danger, Ty Rodgers, Sincere Harris, and Luke Goody back. Like, that is a strong roster, especially from the 2 through 5 positions. But I do think this point guard situation has capped what you potentially could do this season, unless a Ty Rodgers becomes a great option, or unless Sincere Harris and Justin Harmon can be really, solid duo for you that can give you a solid pairing at that position. So I want to get your opinion of it. Like, what do you make of this point guard situation for Illinois basketball?
It's shaky. It was shaky going into the offseason. It's still shaky. Not to say that some things, like you mentioned, can't fall your way, and that Ty, with his development, I know that's something that's going to be as big as any key this offseason, of trying to get him to play more of a defined role. And I think that Ty now can focus on one position, and that probably, not to say he's not going to still play off the ball and mix around a little bit, but as of right now, it sounds like, especially with the questions around Jeremiah Williams, that he's probably your primary point guard option at this point in time. So getting him acclimated to that, can he be someone that can really distribute and just be a ball handler that's going to get pressure on the ball against some really good defenders, and make his way into that role? Because you're gonna see guys play off of you with his lack of shooting, and then he's played on the ball a decent amount as a facilitator throughout his career. Like in high school, Thornton, he was their point guard his last year in high school. USA basketball, facilitated really well in that type of a role. Not saying he was a every possession type ball in his hands guy, but I do like Ty as a point guard option. Personally, I think it, and I think everybody out there is of the same thinking, that as an option, as maybe your secondary guy to come in for 10 to 15 minutes a game in that position. If you have another point guard, you feel pretty good about point guard. Whether that would be Reggie Dennis, I know it didn't happen, but Paul Mulcahy's out there. I understand why you might have some questions of, but you want to stay in the Big Ten, you want to go back to the rack and play against Rutgers in an Atlanta uniform. But if you had Paul Mulcahy at the 1 and Ty as your second 1, I'd feel really good about that spot. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, I know, freshman, talented guy, really, really talented dude. But he's going to come with some of the same questions as Jaden Epps. Is kind of a guy that's wired to score first. Can he facilitate and just get over that learning curve that is there for freshman guards? So I think bottom line for me is that I think fans should be frustrated because, number one, I think it's going to be a good team. But fans should be frustrated because it could be the hole that prevents you from getting where this program needs to go, which is the second weekend and beyond.
Right.
I understand why people are really mad about that, because it's almost like, I think about the 2018 Bears. Like, you had an elite defense, you had some good weapons on offense, you just didn't have a quarterback. Yeah. So if that's what holds you back, the staff deserves big blame for that, and I think that's one thing that people are afraid of.
Yeah, my whole thing, Derek, is I think the staff deserves credit for being able to retain some of these guys and for going to some good players here, right? But they kind of went into this offseason targeting point guard as their biggest need. And now you can't say that, oh, we're good at point guard. So that's my problem. It's like, you did everything else really well, but there's this hole there. It's like, hey, you had a great offseason in baseball, but you didn't get your ace starting pitcher. That is obviously the number one need for your team. So I think if that's where you're at as a fan, I think that is completely fair, because the expectation is now higher. And Illinois, Brad Underwood, have some pressure on them after the NCAA tournament failures. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the Big Ten again. I do think they're going to be one of the top 5, top 7 teams in the Big Ten based on the roster he's put together. But now there's another step everybody wants to take, including Illinois. And the questions at point guard now put pressure on them to have Ty Rodgers or Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, or I don't think Nicolo Moretti, it's fair to put him in that conversation. But if Jeremiah Williams is healthy and eligible, or Justin Harmon is here, like those things, like they need that all to work. And can you do it by committee? I just feel like it's a guards game once you get in the NCAA tournament, and the guards didn't play well enough in 2021. The guards didn't play well enough in 21-22, and you just didn't have the right options. Jaden Epps was hurt late. He was a freshman. Just didn't have the right options. And it feels like that could happen again, that this team, despite its talent upgrades, maybe its experience upgrades elsewhere, you need those things to be a lot better because you still have that hole at point guard. I do want to say this, though, Derek. The one thing I am excited about as a Ty Rodgers fan is that Ty Rodgers is going to be a huge part of this team. Like I think when he's on the floor, you are a better team. My big question is, and I'm happy he's going to get probably 20 plus minutes. I'm happy that I don't think it's going to be a question of whether he got enough playing time as a sophomore, because I think he's a piece you want to build around and keep in your program. My question is, can all these other pieces shoot well enough? Can they shoot well enough? Because he's not a shooter. Can you play him and Danger together? Can you play him, Danger, and Sincere Harris together? That's a big question for me. But you need Shannon, you need Damask, you need Guerrier, you need Goody to be really good shooters, because I do think Ty Rodgers, we saw late in the year, can bully ball people, he can booty ball people, and I do think that's going to be interesting. But he doesn't shoot like Jalen Pickett.
Right. Yeah. Jalen in his last year at Penn State was pretty close, around 40%. And I know that he was able to, in the mid range, too, be someone that hurts you. And to this point, Ty not effective as a scorer outside of the paint. I really liked his ball screen stuff late in the year. Like, he was able to get wherever he wanted to go, get to the rim, was physical, like you said, being able to knock guys on his way to the basket. Can he get that left hand? We've talked about that a decent amount in recent months. Can he have that left hand finish to really become a more effective guy around the basket in terms of upping his finishing percentage at the rim? But I'm all for more Ty Rodgers minutes. I think it's great for you defensively. I do think has another level to unlock in terms of a passer. Like, we didn't see all that he's capable of in terms of the playmaking last year. So I like that about him. I think it's just going to be interesting because it goes from, I know Trotter wrote it, I think, that he had, 17 ball screen or 20 ball screen opportunities last year, to then just throwing it all at him if he is going to be your primary guy in that spot. And how does he respond to that? So I think you can also not necessarily discount the idea that, look, last year they went in knowing that they didn't have maybe a traditional playmaking point guard, just had some risk there with Sky's injury and Jaden. Like, oh, well, we'll just kind of be like the Celtics. We'll run our stuff through our wings. We'll be able to have Terrence and Matt and Coleman be able to initiate offense. Now, the structure within that and the limitations of those certain players, it didn't play out very well. There's a number of different ways to dissect this, but I mean, Damas is a really good passer. Yeah. I think that helps you in that dynamic. I think that Terrence has grown as an off the dribble guy since he got here. And yeah, the shooting around it is really going to be able to, I mean, if you go from being one of the worst shooting teams in D1 last year to at least a mid-level three-point shooting team this year, you're going to win a handful of more games and be more dangerous. So there's that dynamic too. I think also with Brad is the offensive system. I mean, I think you can make up for some of the lack of a ball screen heavy, put the ball in the hands type of point guard every time if you can run some good sets. I mean, UConn, I know that I've heard some buzz around. They're like, oh, who was UConn around Line Circles? Like, who was UConn's point guard last year? Tristan Newton was more of a big guard. Andre Jackson, kind of in a Ty Rodgers mold. But you know what UConn did? They ran like a set every time in the half court. They had a ton of shooting and one of the most dominant big guys in the country. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But
yeah, and let's be honest. Guys going. Let's be honest. Do we trust Brad Underwood with his scheme compared to like Matt Painter? Not yet. Not because we've gone into these seasons where he has to scrap everything mid-season, like last year. Heck, the Io Kofi year, they're a number one seed. They had to scrap it. Like, that's why I think this offseason and workout starting right now, Derek, is so important. And that's where Guerrier not being here yet, Harmon not being here yet, Jeremiah Williams not being like, that's a little bit of a concern, even though it's nice that they have the European trip coming up in August where they're going to Spain, get 10 extra practices there. You get games. I think it's going to be really important for this team, but also really important for Brad Underwood to nail it this offseason when it comes to playing the right systems, because it feels like a lot of lost time opportunity when they've been practicing something else, 5 out all of last year, and then all of a sudden they got to scrap it to go to the spread.
100%. Yeah, he's got to nail that. He's got to be able to make a decision, too, on really what he wants to do. Now, you're trying to fit – I'll give him credit for doing what it takes to fit the roster. Now, it's just been – it's been a little
stubborn. He hasn't been stubborn mid-season, right? Like, that's good.
Correct. But 2 mid-season shifts, both the year 2020 or 2019-20, the breakout year where they went from spread to ball screen with Io, and then last year to go from 5 out back to spread and some just getting away from – too much freelancing and 5 out. This year, I'll be interested. I mean, a full offseason of repping spread, I think, gives you more of an ability to be more dynamic in it, have more more reads, more counters, more cohesion as a roster. If they practice the spread throughout the entire summer, last year you're trying to install it in December, and that's really difficult for a scheme that is all about rhythm and cohesion and everything. I do think there's some limitation to it. I don't know if this is a great comp, but like it kind of reminds me a little bit of the wing tee in football. I think if you do it really well and you got guys that fit it, it can work. But if you put it in we don't see the wing tee in the Big Ten. I think that there is some. If you have a Reggie Bush, do you want him as the pitch guy? Why don't you just maybe do more of a pro style? It's not a pro style offense. Right. I think there's some predictability to it. Like I said, you do need those counters and some of that stuff within it to really make it hard to guard and more shooting too. But I think that that's an interesting standpoint. More set actions. I mean, Purdue runs a ton of sets. A lot of other teams out there run a ton of half-court sets to create movement and flow. There was just too much stagnation, too much of an offense that was being ran 25 feet away from the basket and a lot of guys standing around. So you need to fix that.
Can I talk about one upside of this roster, Derek? If you do have, like, even a Jeremiah Williams or if Ty Rodgers is there, this should be really good defensively. This team should be really, really good defensively. As you look up and down, like the length, the physicality, the versatility of this roster. Like my expectation, like this team was not good defensively at the end of last year. Especially league guards. We saw what Tony Perkins was able to do to Illinois. We saw what some of those Arkansas guys were able to do to Illinois. But like, my expectation for this team is to be a top 3 defense in the Big Ten. And that's where I think sometimes we do get focused on the offense, and understandably so. In the NCAA tournament, you got to go get buckets. But I just think from a game to game in the Big Ten, like I do think this team should have a pretty high floor based on what it does defensively. I know that's not the sexy thing to talk about, but it is important. I mean, we've covered a lot of teams in the Big Ten, and defense usually gets you a pretty high finish in the conference.
Yeah, great defense helps you be consistent. It will be able to heighten that floor for sure. And I think this team has a pretty good upside in terms of that end. I mean, Ty playing more minutes at point guard is going to be someone that can hound people. I do wonder, if he's guarding like a Tyson Walker, Jameer Young, is he quick enough to be able to stay in front of those if he's going to be able to handle that Abu Bui type? Of course, you still have Sincere Harris. You have Justin Harmon, who's thought to be a good defender as well. And then, of course, Terrence, good size, physicality. Coleman with his versatility and the fact that he can pretty much guard anybody. But you're right. I mean, last year, some of these familiar names, they had Terrence, they had Coleman, they had a number of these other guys. Jamison Battle went for 30, Tony Perkins, Jalen Pickett. I mean, the long Kobe Brown, the long list of guys that had career days against Illinois was far too long. So there's going to have to be a little bit more of a consistency. I think defensive rebounding has to be better. That was something that, in a post-Kofi world hasn't been as effective. You got to be able to keep teams off the glass. And I think a guy like Gary A helps you because he's a pretty good rebounder. He's physical. They're playing him at the 4, small ball 5. That's something that he can do. And just an older team. An older team makes fewer defensive mistakes. They're more physically mature. They understand actions their teams are going to run. They don't get caught up in screens as much. I think older teams are more solid at that end. So while you got some guys like Coleman that just naturally are good defenders, and Ty as well, Sincere as well, just an older group should help you as a team defense as well.
Yeah. So just to recap, like we believe point guard is a big concern for Illinois in reaching its ceiling. So I'm trying to think, like we haven't been able to talk with Brad Underwood yet since all of this stuff has gone down. But to overcome that, Derek, they have to be a way better 3-point shooting team, right? And they've added better 3-point shooting with Guerrier Domask, and having a full season of Luke Goody should help. They should be better just consistently defensively and probably with turnovers and just decision-making overall based on them getting older. They should be a good defensive team, which they were for most of last year. And it's a big reason they finished as high as they did in the Big Ten and got to the NCAA tournament. But they also still have some youth. They still have some youth, but I guess that's what Brad Underwood would talk about, right? If he's discussing this or whenever he does discuss it, what do you expect him to say? Some of those things?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the fact that they got at the start they got 2 NBA guys back, 2 guys projected NBA second round to really be your leaders and guys that you are able to rely on, and they played a lot of basketball in the big or in high major. You got Terrence, obviously some Big 12, but and then you bring in a lot of experience. You get Gary A, you get Domas, you get Harmon. This is an old team, experienced team. It should be more consistent in general. It should be a better three-point shooting team because of Domas, because of Gary A, because of Goody being available. And you would think that Coleman, I mean, it's now or never for Coleman to really take that next step as a three-point shooter. If he does that, even just an average 33 to 35 type of three-point guy, I mean, he could really help himself and help this team from beyond the arc as well. So I think that that's a good thing to look at. I mean, Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn shot the three very well at overtime elite. I mean, it was like 39% on like 7 threes a game, overtime elite circuit. So he's a guy that can shoot it as well. I think Brad will talk a lot about Dre. I've heard from people around the program. Gibbs-Lawhorn showed up about a month ago, so he was here early. They say he's as naturally talented as about anybody on that roster.
He's an X factor. Like, I think our expectations are a little lower based on what happened last year, but he is talented. Like, he's explosive. As you said, he can shoot the ball. Probably not a true point guard, but they could use a combo guard, especially if they have Ty running most of their point, or even if they have Jeremiah Williams. Like, going to have a scoring guard is something that made us so excited about Jaden Epps in those spurts, especially in February and January, when he started really raising his game after Sky Clark left. So I don't want to set too high expectations, but he is exciting.
Oh, 100%. I think people's memory of Jaden Epps is a little jaded too. Jaden Epps was a pretty good player for you for a good stretch of last season.
If you have Jaden Epps on this team, Derek, you feel great. Like, I know Jaden Epps had his issues last year. Like, listen, I didn't like some of the body language late in the season, so that wasn't a surprise when he transferred, right? But on the court, like, he showed some things defensively at times that was like, okay, this kid could be really good. But I was so excited about what he showed. I mean, remember Iowa? I mean, what he was doing in that Iowa game in the second half was special. Like, that was a dog, as people like to say. And he wasn't scared. And I think he's going to be a really good player at Georgetown. Now, maybe they needed to go their separate ways, but I don't think that was a good long-term thing for Illinois. Now, maybe Gibbs-Lawhorn can be that, but I would like to have both Jaden Epps and Gibbs-Lawhorn on my team. So, yeah, I think he was a loss, whether they want to spin it one way or another. Like, I think Jaden going to be a real college player.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. We'll see if he can really develop into a pretty darn good playmaker, a guy that sees the floor and makes other people better. But last year, I mean, he was that solid double-figure scorer for a big chunk of that season prior to getting injured. And I know the three-point shooting really fell off towards the end of last season, which is not really all that uncommon for freshmen in the Big Ten. You got a lot of guys that hit Big Ten play and they struggle from three. But, not addressing the point guard position as much as you would have hoped to makes the Jaden Epps loss even bigger. But I do think that Gibbs-Lawhorn has a similar way about him in that he's a pure scorer who's a combo guard that can play on the ball some, might still have some of the limitations that Jaden had last year. But, I mean, to comment, like, finally on Epps, if you had Epps and then, like, Ty Rodgers and Gibbs-Lawhorn as your point guard options, I feel a lot better about where you are there versus now. But, yeah, Dre is someone that athletically, I think defensively he can be very good if he buys in enough there and just kind of learns where to be and everything, because athletically there aren't a lot of limitations where it comes to him. I know in EYBL play and some of the stuff I've seen from him in the past, he's been a guy that can get out and, steals, transition game, and he does shoot the three. He's been kind of a streaky guy. Like, when he's on, he's really hot. When he's not, it can be a little bit more of a roller coaster. Again, that's a similar line we were saying about Jaden Epps last offseason too. So he's more athletic, he's more bouncy, Jaden more strong in terms of contact and everything. But people are excited to see Dre, and they should be.
All right, Derek, let's flip to prep recruits, as Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn was one of those. Amani Hansberry, a guy both excited. I know Illinois is really excited about as well. 2024 class, Illinois has Merez Johnson, who is now the top in-state prospect. Would have been even without James Brown transferring out of the state, as James Brown fell and Merez Johnson continues to be there. I'm a big fan of his game, just ferocious. Defensively, I think he's going to be really good. Rebounding going to be really good. I don't know if he's ever going to be a great shooter or scorer, but Gives me some Musa Diabate vibes, which I think is a really good thing. But are they going to add anybody else in this class of 2024? Seems like it's been a little bit more quiet, though we have seen, them be involved with some 2024 guys. So any names to know in that class as we really start to heat it up this summer?
There are some names to know in terms of just bona fide, gotta have them targets. I don't know that they really have one of those right now. And it's different because even last year we were talking about, they dive in head first on Amani Hansberry and they want him so bad. And let's see how that plays out throughout the summer and into Peach Jam and everything. And I don't think they necessarily have that guy. And it's totally different than obviously 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago when you're hosting, you bring in Ayo Dosunmu, and then the next week you bring in Taylor Horton Tucker, and you just have like a bunch of guys that you host in that class, and it becomes a huge push the next 3 or 4 months. Because as you look at it, I think on one end of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of spots open up. I mean, you're going to lose Terrence and Coleman and Damask and Guerrier and Harmon, and then maybe somebody transfers. I mean, every offseason they've had at least multiple guys transfer, so that could happen. And all you have right now is Merez coming in 24. But I think they still want to have flexibility for the portal because, number one, it helps you get older immediately. You got proven guys in college. And the COVID year is still one more cycle of those guys that were playing as freshmen. You think about Coleman as a senior this year. He was a freshman the year of 2021. That was the COVID year, the free year. You're going to have another batch of guys that still have another season that can hit the portal and go anywhere. So I think you want that flexibility in the portal. So I think that you want this class to be pretty small. That's along the lines of what I've heard. But in terms of guys to name, Mikey Lewis is someone that they offered back in the spring, was one of the top scorers on the EYBL circuit. He's from the West Coast, played for Seattle Rotary, the EYBL team up there in the Northwest, I should say. Chester Frazier's got involved. They offered. He's talked about wanting to take a visit to Illinois at some point. That's one that, I mean, he's a top 75, top 100 guy. He's pretty good scorer, combo guard. I think that's an area that you kind of look for with him. Another name, Larry Johnson, is one they just offered. Larry Johnson is obviously not the rim rocking guy from the Charlotte Hornets back in the day. Charlotte Hornets starter jacket shout out. But
who's on that team? You got Muggsy, you got Jamal Mashburn, Larry Johnson,
Kendall Gill.
Yeah. Vlade was on that team, but that was after the Kobe trade. So that was after those guys. So never mind.
Alonzo Mourning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fun team, man.
Was a fun team. But yeah, Larry Johnson, fun player, one of the top standouts at the Pangos All-American camp recently, a lefty that's good athlete, can score it. He's from out on the West Coast. Illinois just got him in the mix there. They just got him in the mix for Jackson McAndrew, who's a 6'8", 6'9", skilled forward out of Minnesota. He's taken recent officials to Xavier, and I think he's going to Creighton as well. So I want to also mention another name, Michael Robinson. He's 6'6", plays for Oak Hill Academy, plays AAU down in Texas. That's where he lives. But he's taken an official to TCU. He told me earlier this week that he's looking to visit Illinois among some other schools as well. Chester in on that. Chester's really working hard in 24. He's on a lot of these guys. So I think that as you look at it from a need standpoint, I think a skilled forward type of big guy to go with Amani and Merez would be, and Dane would be a fit because you have some physicality there. You got some rebounding and all of that, but you lack some shooting in that front court. I think that's something that with a guy like McAndrew that they might look at. And then on the wing where you're going to lose Terrence, you'll lose Damask. If you want to consider Guerrier in that kind of 3-4 mix, really outside. I mean, and you only got one more year to Luke Goody too. You could use a big guard or a wing that could come in and especially shoot it. I know that Chester had a tweet about net strippers that he had to clarify just in case anybody got confused. But they want shooting for sure.
I think anybody that knows basketball knew what he was talking about, but it was a funny comment. All right, Derek. 2025. I know it's way too early to be thinking about that because the roster's going to change a lot, but I do have my scholarship chart open and it's like, oh, there could be half the roster open in that season because, you're obviously losing Coleman, Terrence, Damask, Harmon, Guerrier this year, and then Dange and Goody potentially, and then more attrition potentially after that. But it should be a bigger prep class potentially if they want to go that route, depending on how they want to balance with transfers, but they can now talk to those guys. They've contacted 2025 prospects the last couple of days. it's early, but who should we know in that 2025 class?
I think the names that a lot of people know, Jeremiah Fears. That's one. Yesterday, he tweeted about taking an unofficial visit to Illinois next week. Illinois was one of the many schools to reach out to him. He's a very talented guard that can shoot it. Different than his brother Jeremy, in that Jeremy more of a tough, strong, bully ball type of point guard that's athletic and bouncy. Jeremiah more slender. Not as explosive, but can really shoot it. Illinois going to be in the mix there. It's going to be interesting as it boils down. What happened to the late in the recruitment with Jeremy? Will that affect things with Jeremiah, and that Illinois kind of pulled back? It seemed like things were trending their way. He ends up going to Michigan State, but he's a talented guy out of Joliet that's now playing Sunrise Christian. You also have Phoenix Gill, that a lot of people are familiar with, Kendall's son, that had a nice showing, St. Ignatius, at the state semifinal in a game against Simeon, put up 20-plus points, and going to see him this weekend at Riverside Brookfield. Looking forward to get a updated eval on him and how he looks. They've reached out to him. They're really like the one high major big player for him right now. I think a lot of people, even if they liked him, probably say, well, if he's good enough for us, he's going to go to Illinois. So that's one of those that you probably won't see a ton of other Big Ten schools or big schools get involved with him because of that fact. In terms of newer names, maybe Alex Alston plays for Kenwood. 6'8".
Can I tell you a story about him?
Yeah.
So I went and saw Ty Rodgers play against Kenwood, which was that loaded team with several. Day-Day Ames was on that team. Went and saw them, but I saw the sophomore game beforehand. There's like this 6'6", 6'7" kid that looks like he should be playing the post, just popping threes and making them. I'm like, oh, I'm going to write that kid's name down. It was Alex Alston. And he turns into a high major prospect, but like he was a freshman at the time. I'm like, oh, that kid's really interesting just because of the length and his ability to make shots. And obviously shot makers that are that long, because he could be a rim protector too, would be really interesting.
Yeah, he can really shoot it. And with size, like you said, 6'8", 6'9" now, Macker and Fire Kenwood guy. They've been in the mix for him and reached out to him yesterday. So that's one to watch. And another guy that'll be at Riverside Brookfield, I'll be able to get eyes on this weekend. In terms of shoot for the moon, and I know everybody, I feel like every mailbag I get asked, when's Illinois going to get a 5-star? I don't know. I think they got the chance to get one, but it might be a while. Koa Pete. He's a guy that his dad, I forget his first name, but he's from Champaign, went to Champaign Central, played football at Northern Illinois. He is like a top 10 player in the country, has been a standout for the USA team, the under 16 that is playing this summer. And I mean, he's a beast. He's probably in that 6'7", 6'8" range. He's built really well, athletic, can shoot it. He's a do-it-all pro level type of talent that is now on the West Coast. He lives in Arizona, but his dad is from Champaign. He's had other siblings that have played athletics, have not gone to Illinois or anything like that. So you wonder what that connection really is, or how much, the connection, but like the pull back to Illinois. Like Kylan Boswell is obviously his grandfather played football at Illinois. So you kind of had that that was at least putting you in the mix or helping you there. I don't know that Illinois has that with Koa Pete, but he was one that they reached out to, obviously among a million other schools. But I mean, he's a big-time player.
I'm just wondering, Derek, nowadays, and this may change once the COVID years are out because teams aren't going to be able to be as old, but with all this transferring, all this, like, I know we're so focused on 5 stars, and in football, we're so focused on 4 stars, but I wonder what the ratio is of these 5 stars going far in tournaments. Like these teams led by, because Duke obviously has had some success with it. Kentucky has not recently. Alabama obviously did not last year. Arkansas has had some success there, but you only get them for 1 year, and they're usually going through some ups and downs. So I think the 30 through 60 range is kind of where I'd love to live, or 30 through 80 or whatever it is, because man, you could have those guys for 3 or 4 years. The issue for Illinois lately is keeping those guys in your program and retaining them. Because man, if you were able to keep some of these guys, I know some of them out, but if you're able to keep these guys, I think that's where you can really shine. It's where Michigan State's really shine.
Yeah, I mean, before the one-time transfer rule went into effect, living in that 30 to 60 range was, I mean, it was really good for Illinois. I mean, Io and Kofi, you got 3 years out of both of those guys. versus you look kind of as like a comparable player. I mean, I mentioned Taylor Horton-Tucker earlier. He was a one and done at Iowa State. Same year, Romeo Langford went to Indiana, same year as Io. They got him for a year.
And this is not to say I don't want to recruit 5 stars.
Yeah.
Because Jalen Hood-Schifino, he really, really good for you, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you would take that type of a talent, and if you can blend it well, if you can get either guys that you've had mature through your program, you've got some vets, like obviously Indiana last year had Trace Jackson Davis. I know they didn't go where they wanted to ultimately go, but or Arkansas's kind of path is we're going to recruit 5 stars, but then we're also going to be huge players in the portal. So have some experience with the portal and then get some 5-star talents as well. But I mean, look at Michigan. Look at the type of talents that Juwan has brought in via high school, and they just don't stick. I mean, they don't stick there long enough because they go to the pros, whether it's Caleb Houston, Diabate. They got Buffkin for 2 years. Really, it was only 1 year of an impact. So that's kind of been Jet Howard. It's been a tough thing for Michigan to do as well. I'm not, and again, like what you said, we're not doing a pound our fist on the table for let's not get 5 stars, but there is kind of that dynamic of you're probably only going to have them for a year. But to be fair, I know that there's going to be people out there that immediately say, well, you only had Jaden Epps for a year, and you only had Sky Clark for a year, and you only had Brandon Podziemski for a year. I get it. I mean, it's hard to keep freshmen in general.
I don't think you want to live on. Like, I think the days of living on that, you've seen Duke pivot. Like, they still get 5-star prospects, but they have supported them with these older guys. They've gone after older transfers to support them a little bit. I think that's the key. If you're going to get those level of players like Arkansas has, like, yeah, sure, Anthony Black and Nick Smith, but we're going to go get these other really talented transfers like Ricky Council that probably are going to be our best players. And then you elevate them to another level. And hopefully you can be hitting your stride late in the season. And Arkansas really wasn't a great team last year, right? I mean, they were in the 8 or 9 seed. I mean, and then they lose in the second round. So they didn't live up to the expectations that they had, even with all those talented freshmen, potentially 2 lottery picks. So it just, the point was, I don't think a 5-star means all of a sudden the team has arrived. Like I think an Io DeSumo for 2 or 3 years is more than 1 5-star for 1 year.
Yeah, right. I mean, look at Kentucky this offseason. Kentucky has the #1 recruiting class in the country, and you can tell times have changed because Kentucky fans are freaking out. Well, #1, they have like 7 scholarship players, maybe 8 now, but they know that the mold of just bringing in a bunch of 5 stars and trying to make that be a Final Four type of team, it hasn't happened in a long time. I think that the Duke, Tyus Jones, Justice Winslow, Jaleel Okafor team was really the last team that was really built on freshmen that won it all. And that was like 11 years ago or 12 years ago. It's been a long time. I know Kentucky had another one with Anthony Davis. When you get that type of a talent, that's going to be able to help you. But you got to have the experience. And when you got the guys playing 5th years, I mean, you got 23, even sometimes 24-year-olds playing in college. That's hard for 18-year-olds to go up against. And yeah, it's more transfer heavy, and you got to be able to blend that too. So you'd love to have a talent that is that big to be able to come in and get a 5-star for a year, but you can't just rely on that. And it shows the pivot of some of these teams trying to go with the transfer route as well, and just not relying on it because it hasn't paid off for somebody big time in a while.
Yeah, and the last one Illinois got was D Brown, and I mean, I think he's the only one of the recruiting era, right? Like, so it's not like this is like the expectation for Illinois basketball. It's really, for football, like they got Regis Ben and Martez Wilson in one class, but those are the only 2. Like it's very rare that they land them. They're hard to get. They're really hard to get, and I think it's got to be someone you have a relationship with, Derek. I think it's got to be someone that, maybe a local. But I think for Illinois, but I think getting a Merez Johnson in your program is huge. I think he could be a great foundational piece for you moving forward. And I don't think just because he doesn't have a 5th star that I'm less excited about him.
Yeah, right. Definitely. I mean, if he had what he had and he could also, shoot the 3, then he's a pro and he's only going to be there for a year. But I would take him for 3 years if he is, just a little bit less of a polished offensive player and is going to give you what he gives you for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's been teams that are not traditional powers in basketball that have gotten 5-star talents. Like Rutgers has the #2 player in the country committed to them right now. I mean, we saw obviously Ben Simmons, LSU. That was a connection, like you said. that you probably need to be able to pull that in. But yeah, I mean, if you can get Merez for 3 years, you got Io for 3 years, you got Kofi for 3 years, you can have Ty Rodgers for 3 years. Those type of players help you not only win for 1 year but multiple years, and that helps you get older too, and have some all Big Ten, maybe even all American types that we've seen. If you're just a freshman, it's hard to be that good of a player.
I guess I forgot Sky Clark was technically a 5-star recruit when he committed, but that was a relationship, right? Didn't work out. Jeremy Richmond didn't work out. He was a 5-star, fell to a 4-star too. But yeah, some of them don't work out, but that was based on relationships or getting in incredibly early in on a recruit. So I think we covered that. Anything else, Derek, that people should know about Illinois basketball? I feel like we already need games to start with this team.
It's too bad you can't have like exhibition games throughout the summer. I think I read an article recently that the NCAA is going to consider whether that's something that they will allow. Imagine like Illinois and West Virginia doing battle in July. Now, I don't know if it'd be on TV or people could actually see it. Right. It might be one of those close scrimmages, which really doesn't do too much value for the fan and the consumer. But yeah, we need something. I think buzz will start to trickle out here soon on what off-season workouts look like. And yes, all of that stuff is 90 to 95% always positive, and maybe sometimes exaggerated a little bit. So you got to – I try to sift that as best as possible and give you the best lowdown that I can. But
if Brad Underwood really wants to calm his fans' nerves about their team, like and I don't want to say these 10% who think Illinois is not making the tournament, maybe they end up right. Like if the absolutely worst things happen. But I think this team is going to be pretty good. But I think you should hold an open practice in July or August, right before a football game, or September, right before a football game, and show them, hey, we have Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins. These other guys look pretty good. We're very high on Ty Rodgers, and you love Sincere Harris. We love Sincere Harris. We expect them to take steps forward. Do that, right? Let's get these guys out in front of people and have Luke Goody strip some nets. How about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. You are going to have, like you mentioned, the Spain foreign trip. I believe I was over there in Italy. Were those games streamed at all? I know streaming is a little bit more advanced than it was maybe in 2019, but
I don't think so.
I wonder if that'll be in the mix this August. That could be something that could calm some nerves. If Ty Rodgers looks great on the ball as a point guard in that type of a sense. If Nicola Moretti looks more further advanced than people would have expected. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for, let's do it before I guess maybe that'd be early morning before the Penn State game, the big noon kickoff. Although people might want to go over and see Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and Urban Meyer in person. They'll be on campus, right? That's how they do that, or are they in studio?
I would hope they're on campus, but we still got to figure that out. But yeah, or do it before the Toledo game, man. It's a primetime game.
That's true.
Bring people over to the State Farm Center or something right before it.
Yeah, right. I like that idea.
Derek Piper, you're the goods, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Always fun.
All right.